Good morning, everyone. Or actually, it's good afternoon. I am dressed like this with Caribbean clothes because I just got back from the Caribbean on a month-long cruise. Had lots of fun. And right now, looking out my window, there is 1.5 feet of snow in my front and backyard. Lots of snow on the mountains. And Colorado right now is rather cold. 2 days ago, we got another 1.5 feet of snow. Additionally, I've been cooped in here in my home office and around the house under a quarantine. And the quarantine's been self-imposed, but it's still a quarantine. Because having had pneumonia several times, Legionnaire's disease, and a bug called Aurelius, which is related to anthrax, I've decided that it would be too much of a danger for me to go out, even though I do miss my friends and everything else. So I'm sitting here thinking about what I should say. And being locked up, so to speak, gives you a lot of various subjects to think about. And one of the things I was thinking about is not writing what I've got, because I spent a lot of time on this one article and I don't type, so I have to dictate, and I use dictation software. And I have to go over and over and over to correct the spelling, correct the diction, correct the various errors. And it takes too long and I'm not reaching as many people. When I did my protest over this 420 ruling at the university, I got about 100,000 hits on my video. When I did that presentation for the Cannabis Society, I got more than that. So I'm going to try this for a while, and hopefully you people will like it. The one thing about writing things is no matter how hard I tried to work, without a professional editor, I always had a few typos and other errors. And no matter what I had to say, somebody had a criticism, and some were quite insulting, like what a mask if I even had an education. Anyway, my priorities at this stage of my life isn't to impress people, and it isn't to get clients by putting out perfectly polished documents. I already had that. What I have is a message that I want to get out to the people, and hopefully this will start doing it. One of the things that strikes me during this epidemic is the idea that many people in government and politics have of entitlement. We have a president whose major concern is the stock market. He measures his performance by the stock market. Now let's look at the stock market. First off, it's privately held. It's privately owned. Secondly, who is investing in the stock market? Well, the average worker doesn't invest much in the stock market. It's the large corporations and the wealthy individuals. And what did they do to get their wealth? Well, a few of them had some inventions and ideas, but the vast majority of them inherited it and never worked a lick in their lives. Or if they did work, it was to preserve their own assets or to manage their own assets, like our president did. There's a difference there between that and going out and obtaining employment through an employer. Now, we have a bailout. There's a lot of people out of work. There's a lot of people that don't have medical care. There's a lot of people who don't have housing. And generally speaking, it's the underbelly of the United States. A lot of it came out in the Depression with pictures of bread lines and things like that. In this day and age, you don't see it as much because clothing is relatively cheap and you have fast food and things like this. But it's still there. And I think we should, as a society, owe an obligation to these people to at least give them a minimum of care. So what I was reading about today is the fact that Wall Street has got a slush fund, apparently, to take care of the corporations. Well, it's ironic. A corporation, why would you have to take care of a corporation? People pool their money so they can, in a corporation, so that they can minimize risk. But there is risk. Now, I would like to go to the crap table. I like to play craps. I'd like to go to crap table and have a government underwrite or fade or make good all my bad bets on the crap table. And that's what we're doing with these industrialists. They can bet this, that, or the other. They can lie, cheat, and steal. They can send out false statements or even ship rocks in boxes like a Boulder County corporation did once. And it hurts the shareholders, but generally doesn't hurt the public. Maybe it hurts the consumer somewhat. But if they go through bad times, they have the ability to print money. They can go issue more stock. Now, if the stock isn't worth as much as it was a year or two ago, that's too bad, but they can still do it, and they can still stay operating if they have the ability to raise money through a stock and have the ability to keep its price up on the exchange. Now, if they don't have the ability to raise money by a stock offering, then the company isn't worth its shit anyway, and why would anybody buy it? But if there's potential, they'll buy it. The result is the existing people they're going to get diluted. Their stock, say they had one share out of 1,000, it might be one share out of 2,000. So they get a 50% dilution. The share may have been $1, now it's 50 cents. So they get 50% reduction and another 50% on the additional stock. Well, so what? If they didn't want to take a risk, they shouldn't have invested in the stocks in the first place. But they did. And that was one of the warnings put on every prospectus in a stock offering that I've read, that there's a certain degree of risk. And it'd be almost more honest to put a warning that if the government doesn't bail us out for our stupid, dumbass decisions, then you might have to stand a loss. And that's the way it is now. So, secondly, if you look at some of the people that are on stock, years ago, the government promoted the idea that we should privatize things. And one of the things they wanted to do is capture the Social Security funds. They also wanted to let up on the corporations that were cheating by not funding their pension funds. So they privatized the pension funds and got more play money. And they convinced people that you invest in IRAs and this, that, or the other. Put your money in the stock market and you could retire, because look at what the stock market's done over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's grown. When I studied trust in law school, one of the first things they taught us was you don't gamble with your trustee's money or with your beneficiary's money. What you do is you make investments to make sure that he gets a certain amount of income, because it's supposed to produce income. Trust management in the area of pension funds were the same. If you have 1,000 people in your pension liability column, and you want to give each one of these $1,000 a month, then you invest in investments that yield 1,000 times 1,000 per month money, spending money. So then you can issue a $1,000 check to each one of your pensioners and not get hurt. But then in the Reagan administration, they loosened up, and all these hustlers from Wall Street were able to come into pension funds and show these charts. Look what the market's done. If you would have put your money in all of these on the market, you would have 10 times as much money in the pension fund to pay off your people. Well, that's probably true. But at a time like this, what's happening to those pension funds? They're all getting screwed. Excuse me. So that's one of the examples of what my friends and myself call class warfare. Let's take another example. A lot of you read about my experience in Fort Lauderdale, Miami last year on my last trip abroad. Well, you know that I was in Las Vegas appearing on Pawn Stars. After that, right before I went to Pawn Stars, I had implants put into my mouth for teeth implants. They got infected and the implants got rejected. And I went on vacation not wanting to interrupt it just because of the infection. I took antibiotics and I was assured by the oral surgeon that everything would be okay when I got back, as long as I took certain measures and did not do certain things. So I'm gone for a few weeks. We come back and the ship lands in Miami. I spend a day in Miami recovering. And my mouth in the last 4 or 5 days was really hurting. All of the implants were loose and ready to fall out. I checked with a dental surgeon in Miami and he said, get home and start antibiotics as soon as possible. So we cut that short and went to Fort Lauderdale to catch our plane. And the plane was Southwest Airlines. So I get on the plane and I have a prescription to use oxygen during a flight. And the prescription reads as needed. And I carry an oximeter. And rarely do I have to use oxygen on a plane because I don't put it on unless my oximeter shows less than 90. And going to Denver, I can generally tolerate that if they don't fly too high. And if they fly too high, I just put the oxygen concentrator on and get my blood oxygen up to 90 and take it off. Well, I get seated in the seat and this young steward comes up to me and says, you can't sit there. Now, here I am on my last legs with this infection, running a fever of over 100. My teeth hurt. I needed painkillers. And I have a bladder problem that I can't sit for more than 20 minutes without having to go. And I was sitting in an aisle seat so that I could go without interrupting people. And I could stretch out a little bit more with the aisle seat. And I was in much pain. And this guy said, well, our rules are you have to sit in the window seat if you're going to use the concentrator. I said, fine, I won't use the concentrator then. He says, well, now that I see it, you have to use it. Or we can't let you fly because you have to have a concentrator to fly. And I said, no, I don't really have to have a concentrator. It's convenient and I can go for a while without oxygen. So I'm going to go ahead and go. And he said, no. And we sat there and argued. And then he comes back with an iPad thing. And he says, here, it's an FAA regulation. Now, I was a pilot once. I'm familiar with FAA regulations. And because of the hassle with concentrators, I carried the regulations around. And I was one of the first people to use a concentrator on a flight. So I'm pretty familiar. And the rule is in coordination with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you have an infection, if you have a bad bladder, this, that, and the other, that all comes under the act. But this kid comes up and he shows me this thing and it says he tells me it's an FAA regulation. Well, it's not an FAA regulation, first off. But he tells me people wearing oxygen masks have to sit on the window. Now, that probably, if it exists at all, was an internal policy memo by the airlines. But I know it's not part of the FAA. And I think the kid should have known that. And he deliberately lied because he didn't want to argue with me or look things up. He was a lazy bastard. So somebody comes on board, and I said, well, if I can't do it this way, I don't want to fly back to Denver in wet slacks. So there's no point in me being on this plane. And I get off. Now the regulations say they have to make reasonable accommodations. And the only reasonable accommodation they were going to make would be with the oxygen, and the oxygen, anything other than a window seat, was against their internal regulations. So they could make no reasonable accommodation. They could have, but they didn't recognize other illnesses as an as an illness or as something that caused a disability. So I sit there, and the guy taking me off the airplane, called a physician of some sort, and the physician asked a few questions about when I wore oxygen, things like that. Didn't ask me about the implants, didn't ask me about the swelling, didn't ask me about the infection or any other problems. And had he looked, I'm under 18 medications. Anyway, my wife is pretty much my caregiver. She pushes my wheelchair around, and she keeps track of my medications because I don't really give a shit one way or the other, and takes care of all the other stuff. And she carries my passport and other identification and things like that in a knapsack with the concentrator. When I got off the plane, the concentrator, the knapsack, all my medications and everything else were left behind. As I was arguing with the manager of the Lauderdale Southwest Airlines gate, the plane took off. So here I am stranded. There's not another plane out. In the meantime, I was going over some of the other ailments, and I could tell he was kind of panicking. And I got to admit that I was taking some delight in his discomfiture and thought he should be panicking a little bit. So this was right before noon. We sat around all day long trying to resolve the issue, but they were steadfast in the fact I had to sit in the aisle seat or in the window seat. So when there were no more flights, he said, well, we'll deal with this in the morning. And he gave me a voucher for Holiday Inns. I sat and waited. Well, he pushed the wheelchair out to the pickup spot, and I waited 2.5 hours for the Inn's shuttle to come pick me up finally. They have two of them, and I got on the wrong shuttle once, and they had to drop me off. But I get to the location of the Holiday Inn, and they're pretty crowded, and I hadn't eaten since breakfast because I was dealing with Southwest, and they said it'd be a while before my room was ready. So they gave me a temporary key and told me I could go have dinner. So I went and had some lobster bisque in the dining room, and I got back, and they refused and said they had no rooms. So here I am, stuck without my medication. I'm stuck without my oxygen. I'm stuck without anything, really, not even a toothbrush. They did give me this little kit. I forget what was in it. And no place to sleep. So by then, we'd used my cell phone quite a bit. And it ran down. Now, I give this credit to the desk clerk at the Holiday Inn. He did look for a charger for an Apple iPhone. That's what I had. And I had other things too, but not with me. So he told me that I could maybe get a charge cord for the iPhone at the filling station about a block away. The problem is it was raining cats and dogs out there by then. But I needed to get a hold of people. I wanted to call Arlene and tell her everything was okay and things like this. So I went out to the outside and walked through the rain to the gas station. and it was closed. And it was kind of in a rough neighborhood, and I guess the custom is you knock on the door, they see who you are, and then they let you in. But I didn't know that. I was standing out in the rain, getting more and more wet, and this guy comes up and offers me a ride back to the hotel. Well, it didn't end that way, and it was kind of a frightful experience. I don't know what he intended, but he drove around a little bit and wouldn't take me back, so finally I jumped out of the car and left. I get back to the hotel after about 20 minutes, sopping wet, probably pissed off. I don't know. I think I may have been beyond that point at that time. In any event, I go in there, and this smart-ass clerk told me there were no rooms. And I showed him the voucher from Southwest Airlines, and he said, well, that doesn't specify this Holiday Inn. Now, what I had, I'm going to show you here and pull this out of my wallet because I saved it. And I think, hopefully, they're going to rue the day that they did this. I got pop-up screens here. Now, can you people see this? It says, upside down, it says, smile, unlock your smile. That's what it says, unlock your smile. And that was given me by the desk clerk at the Holiday Inn in Fort Lauderdale. And what this is a room key that he gave me so that I could get a meal because I was in the process of getting checked in, just waiting for a room. I showed him that, and he said, so what? So I had to spend the whole night in the lobby with just having had a bowl of soup until 6 o'clock the next morning, trying to sleep in a chair in the lounge at the front desk without a charged cell phone, in misery. I couldn't get a pain pill. I couldn't get anything to take the swelling out of my mouth. I was probably coming down with a cold. I was still feverish, and I'm sitting there. Well, the guy tells me that in the next morning, if I couldn't get a hold of Southwest, they would get me on a flight, or they would get me a ride to Miami Airport. Well, they got me a ride to Miami Airport, but when I got to the airport, the guy demanded payment of $80. I had $100 bill left, and he gave me $80 or $20 change. That's all I had there. I had to make sure and guarantee that I got to Denver from Miami. I had purchased a first-class ticket on on I think it was American Airlines or Eastern Airlines, some other airlines other than Southwest. So I go there and stand in line, and the guy meets me, and he says, "You're Mr. Blewett?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, we can't let you get on the plane because the bank wouldn't honor your credit card." It was the fraud division on the credit card. So I'm going to show you this. I had been out of the country on a cruise for about 2 weeks. I notified the bank that I was going to go on a cruise, and so they were aware of it. This is the credit card that I used. No, it isn't. That's my other one, the business one. I used the other Chase card, which I have here somewhere. Well, anyway, it was like this Chase card. It looked exactly like it. And There's the back of it. And I took all my travel on it. All my other charges were on it, including the Southwest air ticket to Denver. So I get to the Miami airport. I'm there, and they won't let me on the plane because I couldn't pay for the ticket, because the credit card that I had for several years with a $30,000 credit limit on, was rejected by Chase Bank. And the reason they rejected it, it was the fraud division, because I had 2 flights charged to Denver a day apart, one out of Fort Lauderdale and one out of Miami. So rather than contacting me or investigating or whatever, the computer system kicked in. The fraud division says, oh, this is fishy. And they suspended the card without telling me, of course. So now I'm hanging out at Miami airport, and they won't let me on the plane, and they won't recognize the card. I can't call anybody because my cell phone is dead. So, and I didn't have a wallet because that was on the plane, so I didn't have ID. And I had a reservation for a first class ticket that they wouldn't honor. Well, by then,